part of the world. I am excited that you are here today. I am looking forward to sharing these skills and tools with you, and am hopeful that you will not only find these helpful for yourself, but helpful for loved ones as well, who are struggling or hurting. So I'm not sure if there's anyone new this week over last week, but I will just offer a very brief introduction of myself. If there are any people who are newer, my name is Tara Burk. I work as a licensed marriage and family therapist. I just have the privilege and the honor of walking along people. Sometimes I work with individuals, sometimes I work with couples, and sometimes I work with families who are struggling, sometimes with anxiety, sometimes with depression, sometimes other things, but really enjoy walking alongside people and helping people out. I graduated from Bethel Seminary in 2012 and became licensed in 2014. And I currently work for an organization in Minnesota called Family Innovations, and just really love to be a part of a team of people here that are just so amazing. And then a little bit about me personally. I am married to a wonderful man named Steve. We've been married 10 years. We don't have any children of our own, mostly because we've adopted children from all over, whether it's a niece and nephew biologically, or we just kind of have adopted them. We really felt called and led to come alongside parents, helping and equipping them. We really feel like it takes a village to raise a child, and so we want to partner with people who are raising kids rather than having our own. So, well, thank you. For those of you who sent in questions from last week, I wanted to kind of address some of those. A lot of the questions, kind of the theme that I would say that these questions have is really how to help loved ones. And as I mentioned last week, every person in their struggle is unique. And then on top of their uniqueness as a human being, there's their unique struggles with mental health. And then on top of that, there's a uniqueness happening within people's families. And then of course, their larger context, maybe their community or and as a result of that, I am not able to learn those specifics in this kind of group format, and I'm not able to offer specific advice as a result of not having that specific information. And so the struggle there is that in order to give you that information, that would actually maybe require could require future talks, things like on boundaries or communication or conflict, which each of those in and of itself could be a separate larger conversation, which we just don't have the time for today. And a part of the struggle is that if I give you the wrong advice that doesn't apply, that could actually harm more than it can help. And so I want to so all that to say, I am not withholding that information from you. I am just not able to give it to you. And that's why we're going to be kind of focusing on some skills today. I want you to leave here with some real practical, tangible things that you can do to not only help yourself, but to be able to help a loved one as well. So And so that is the focus. The intention is that you use these skills to help other people. And even though we're not able to maybe dive into any of the specifics, my hope is that these things will be helpful and that you can carry these with you. So I thought it might be helpful for us to start with a little bit of a review or a recap from last week. I have a couple of slides here that I wanted to share with you. And this is what we talked about last week. Oh, here it is. Sorry, there's just a little bit of a delay there. This is what we talked about last week. This is called the CBT triangle. And some of you may remember that this is a teaching tool. It's an oversimplification of how our brains work. And I wanted to put up a visual because I didn't have it last week. And so sometimes these visuals are helpful. And so we have a trigger. Could be anything. Oftentimes it is something happening outside of us. And then that trigger gets filtered through our thoughts. And that thought then moves and triggers a feeling. And that feeling then often produces a reaction. And then that reaction, for better or for worse, is oftentimes a trigger for somebody else. And then you can line up these little triangles, and this one, what can seem like a really small thing, can just turn into this interaction pattern, especially when I have couples in my office and we are talking through things. It's very common for people to say, I have no idea what started it. That is just a really common thing. So with that said, I am curious, and we can even open it up. Would anyone like to share some of their observations of maybe their thoughts and how they maybe notice it being helpful to them maybe throughout the week? Any brave souls out there want to share? No pressure to share. Maybe while you're thinking about it, I can share one of my observations. I'm a planner. I like to plan things. It's a part of my personality, and I think one of the perks about planning is that I have something to look forward to. I had made plans for the week, and they didn't go as planned. And so my thought was initially that I had somehow failed. Because I wasn't able to follow through on a plan. And so I was able to notice that negative thought. And then rather than beating myself up for not being able to follow through on the plans, I was just able to say and acknowledge that a plan is great and it needs to be adapted. And so that was one of the things that I had noticed this week as I was kind of paying attention to and observing my thoughts. So yeah. In line with the power of our thoughts. The first skill that I wanted to talk about or mention is just really talking about gratitude. Want to talk about the power of gratitude in our lives, and also kind of explain why our brains and our bodies like gratitude, and hopefully encourage you to start maybe a gratitude practice of your own, and to use this as a way of coping, perhaps, or to be able to maybe encourage a loved one as well, to be able to implement this into their coping. So I just want to take a few minutes to define gratitude and what it is. It's an affirmation of goodness. We affirm how there are good things in the world, gifts and benefits, and that we receive them. Sometimes we partner with people to receive them, and sometimes we just receive them. We have done nothing to deserve this goodness, but we receive it. And so a part of gratitude also is this recognition that the source of this goodness is outside of us. And healthy gratitude really involves this humble dependence. And it is really actually healthy to view ourselves in relationship to other people, to allow other people to depend on us, and for us to learn how to depend on healthy people. And of course, that can, you can go in a negative ditch in both of those, but it can be really helpful to be able to rely on other people, and also to be able to rely on God. Gratitude isn't just something that we offer to other people. We can offer it to the Lord as well. One of the things that I'll maybe just like pause here, and well, actually, I will continue on here. So that is gratitude. And the first thing that is really important to know about gratitude is that gratitude is a choice. On our hard days, gratitude is a very, very difficult choice, but it is a choice nonetheless. It's really important to pause and to acknowledge that gratitude is not minimizing a problem or a stressor. When we talk about gratitude, it's of the utmost importance that we talk about a both and position. A both and position is saying that these two things are equally true, versus an either or, where I have to choose between one or the other. So an example of a both and position might be able to say, you know, a couple got into a fight, or there was a conflict, and for them to say, you know what, we both did things that we regret, and we both are committed to making the necessary changes that we need to make, versus it being one or the other's fault. To say we're both at fault here, we both need to make changes in order for our relationship to be better. And so taking a both and position is really, really important, because gratitude and the power of our thoughts isn't about ignoring problems in life. It's being able to say, I have a problem. That's true. I'm not ignoring it, and I'm not pretending it's not there. And I have a choice as to where I'm going to focus my attention. I can focus my attention on this negative thing, or I can choose to focus my attention on this positive thing. Generally, what we focus on gets bigger. And so we have a choice. What we focus on, and what we focus on makes a difference in our minds and in our hearts. And so that's really important, especially if you are talking to a loved one about gratitude. It's going to be really important that you communicate to them that this is not a way of minimizing or ignoring your struggles. This is a way of choosing what you are going to focus on. So if someone is really, really anxious, you know, I'll just pick COVID, right? So a lot of people are worried about COVID and worry about their health, or if they're not worried about their health, more likely they're worried about someone that they love, maybe who has a compromised immune system. And so it's not saying that I'm not going to worry, or to say that that worry doesn't matter, but I am going to maybe focus on the really low percentage of people who have died. Or I'm going to focus on the people who I know who've recovered and who are healthy. And to choose to say these things are equally true, but I'm going to focus on the positive. I'm going to focus on what I'm thankful for. There is a whole bunch of research on gratitude and how, again, just harnessing the power of our thoughts actually helps us not only emotionally in decreasing our depression and our anxiety, but it also helps our physical and our spiritual health as well. And here are just a few things that I wrote down here. Stronger immune systems, lower blood pressure, increased risk of heart attack, increased sleep. That is a huge one. And then for our spiritual health, we are more likely to be more forgiving and more willing to be supported by others when we are grateful and when we express our gratitude for somebody. Perhaps you can think back to a conflict that you had with somebody. Any loved one, maybe it was a parent or a child or a spouse. Tunnel vision kicks in, right? And all you can see is whatever it was about that person that you didn't like. Maybe they had done something or said something that was hurtful, and all of a sudden that just becomes like all of that person. Whereas gratitude can help shift our person and shift our focus, and where we say, yep, that hurtful thing did indeed happen. We're not going to ignore or pretend that it didn't happen. And we're going to say, you know what? This person is also very kind, generally. Or this person has this strength. Or this person has this skill set. And that just, again, helps us hold the both and allows the person that we are angry with to not be defined by their behavior or their action that they did that was hurtful. And it can help be able to put some things into perspective. I want to pause here for a moment and explain some of the brain science between how our brains operate. And I want to do that for actually a few reasons. One, I want to help you clarify your understanding of why this skill is helpful and what it can do for you. I also want to clear up some really common misconceptions and misunderstandings about our emotions and how our emotions can play out in negative ways. I also want to help equip you to be able to cope with your own emotions when you start to feel escalated in a healthy way. And then last but not least, also to empower you to be able to help others as well. So the amygdala part of our brain is where all the emotions are held. Perhaps you've heard the phrase fight mode, flight mode, or fix it mode. The amygdala is really in charge of that response. That is kind of the reptilian, the instinct, the pure emotion center of our brains. And it's actually nicknamed the lizard part of our brains because if you were to look at a human amygdala and compare it to a lizard's amygdala, you'd really have to know what you're looking at to be able to differentiate the two of them. And so whenever you feel that whoosh of emotion, and notice that urge to just react rather than respond. Your amygdala has gotten fully charged and engaged. And when you are being chased by a wild animal, that is really, really important. It is there by design. And the design and the good purpose of that is it's going to enable you every system in your body that you need to run and fight to be ramped up so that you have the strength that you need to run and fight. And everything that you don't need to run and fight is going to get shut off because you're conserving all of your energy to pour into what you're doing to run and fight. Unfortunately, this response happens to a variety of triggers. And your brain has no way of knowing if the trigger is physical or if the trigger is social and emotional. So the same response that your body would have if you were being chased by a wild animal is that exact same response when you get into a fight with your spouse, or when there is conflict at work, or when you feel shamed by a family member. That same emotional response is going to be triggered. And a part of what happens when that response is triggered, it sends a chemical dump into your brain. And the cortex, the thinking part of your brain, that you need for higher reasoning, gets shut off. This chemical dump essentially says, thanks, but no thanks. We don't need you right now. And so not only does the thinking part of your brain get shut off, but things like your digestive system also get shut off, because if you're running and fighting, you don't need to think or to digest food. And so, so that's why, if you've ever wondered why you or a loved one says or does all sorts of hurtful things when they're really, really angry or really, really escalated, that is why. That thinking part of your brain gets shut off for about 18 to 22 minutes. And sometimes it's, well, not sometimes, it is skillful to be able to recognize that that thinking part of my brain has been shut off, and then to do things to re-engage that thinking part of our brain to get it back online, so that we are just not responding, or we're not reacting just out of our emotions, but we're able to respond. And a part of responding is that we have access to both our thoughts and our feelings in making wise choices, and hopefully being able to live out of our values at that point. So, so that process happens. Your body and your brain doesn't ask, when is a good time for this to happen? It just happens instantaneously. And these negative chemicals that get sent into our body can, I guess the phrase that's coming to mind is kind of do damage, but that is maybe very dramatic, and I don't want to be that dramatic. But it's those chemicals that can lead to some higher blood pressure, some decreased sleep, and things that make our life a little bit more difficult. And so it's really helpful when we're able to help our body flush out these negative chemicals that, while they serve a really good purpose, they aren't helping us. And so that process happens automatically. It doesn't give you a say so. It doesn't say is now a good time. It just happens. And so those negative thoughts can lead to those painful feelings, which lead to this brain physiological response that is happening in your body. The neat part about that, though, is that another process can also take place. And that is where the power of gratitude really, really comes into play. When we think thoughts that are positive and hopeful and praiseworthy, when they are gracious and drenched in gratitude, that also signals and produces chemicals in our brains. But these chemicals are healthy for us. These chemicals actually heal our brain and can heal our body, can lead, like the previous slide said, can lead to that increased sleep, can lead to that lower blood pressure, can lead to some of these other positive things. Unfortunately, while the negative response is automatic, the positive response is not automatic. And so that's where it's really helpful to learn how to be really intentional about thinking, and why, from a therapeutic standpoint, we consider it a skill to be able to hold the both and. Because we want to not only help you manage those negative, those painful emotions and those negative, hurtful chemicals that are being dumped into your body, but we also want to help you produce those positive ones to get that going again. So there's a couple different, 4 different types of gratitude practices that can help people be really intentional about harnessing this power of gratitude. The first one is to be able to do for every day for 21 days. The research says that it takes 3 weeks to start a new habit, thus the 21 day. That is kind of research based. I'm not just making that number up. And it's important, again, this is about holding that both and. You can have a really, really crummy day. And at the end of the day, to be able to say, yep, today was a crummy day. And what happened today that I can be grateful for? And just the fact that your brain is looking for something to be grateful for actually changes your brain chemistry. Let's say you had such a bad day that your brain cannot think of anything. Understandable, you just had a really hard day. But the fact that you actually were intentional about looking for something that was positive actually starts to change your brain and your brain chemistry, which just highlights the amazing power that gratitude can have in our lives. So a couple of things to keep in mind if you choose to follow through with this gratitude practice. It's important that you write them down. Just thinking it isn't really as helpful, the research says, until you write it down. There's something about writing it down that kind of solidifies it, that makes it a little bit more real. These things can be as big or as small as you want. Could be a nice breeze or a hot shower, or that strong cup of coffee that helped you wake up this morning as you were getting off to your day. The important thing here, though, is 3 things. Write them down and to be specific. The more specific you are, the more helpful and the more you're going to notice the benefits of you doing this practice. So rather than just saying, I'm thankful for my family, to be able to say, I am thankful. So in my case, my husband is Steve. I am thankful that Steve helped me with the dishes today. Or I am thankful that he was able to return a call. Or I was thankful that he expressed his gratitude for how hard I worked on this project. Or I was just really thankful after having a bad day that the cashier at the store smiled at me, and I could just tell that she really was, concerned about how I was doing. Could be small or big, but the point is to be specific. Our brains love novelty. And so being specific actually helps that wiring in your brain to be strengthened. And according to some research that was done that came from Harvard, doing this practice for 21 days actually will help train your brain to look at the world in a different way. It will start to scan the world for the positives, not just the threats. And this is really important, especially for those people struggling with anxiety or depression. When we feel anxious, our mind generally is overly focused on what could go wrong. And sometimes we justify that because we need to be prepared. And there is some truth to that, of course, as you already know. And so when you're anxious, you're scanning the things for what can go wrong. But oftentimes people with depression are also doing that. They're not scared that something's going to go wrong. They just expect it. And people who are depressed often don't feel like they have the energy needed to deal with things that go wrong. And so in addition to scanning the world for threats, now you're learning to scan the world for these positive things as well. The next is to pick an event. Could be anything, but be specific. Again, you want to harness that power of being specific. And this can be from any time in your life. Could be an event, could be a person, an experience, might be a comment, a vacation or a walk in nature. And it is important just to sit down, spend a few minutes writing all of the details down about that experience. Maybe you took a walk in the park. Was it sunny and bright and warm with a nice breeze? Was it brisk with a cold wind? Were the leaves on the trees colorful and bright? Was it very green? Or was it if you live in Minnesota, was it the dead of winter and there's no leaves on the trees? The point is to really immerse yourself in this experience and to be as though you are reliving it. And as you remember the positive experience, your brain labels it as something that is meaningful, and that imprint on your brain deepens. Your brain cannot tell the difference between you reliving something and you visualizing it. So let's say the negative of this, let's say you get into a conflict with your boss at work. That conflict happened one time, but you visualized it or you've relived it 17 times. Your brain cannot tell the difference between the first time it happened and the 17 other times that you were reliving it. And so that your brain thinks it really happened 18 times. And because of how that amygdala works and those chemicals that get dumped into our brain, for 17 times you've been, experiencing that negative chemical dump. And your body has been needing to process those negative chemicals. And so here you're doing that, but you're doing the positive version of it. rather than reliving the negative, now you're choosing to relive something that was positive. And now you're getting the benefits of that again, even though it happened only one time. And so it just kind of doubles that good feeling, and it doubles those good chemicals in your brain. The other thing is to have a themed gratitude for the day. This can be really great. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to find things that we're grateful for because we're just kind of accustomed to take things for granted. And so I'll share a personal example. So I shared with you earlier just me observing my thoughts this week and meaning to remind myself that I wasn't failing for not being able to follow through on a plan. One of the things that I noticed is that I really demand a lot of my body. Sometimes I can feel frustrated with it. I'm working on a project or something and be like, oh, I have to go to the restroom again. And I don't want to interrupt what I'm doing. And so one of the themed things that I did was I just said, I'm going to be really grateful for my body. I have a friend who is blind. And so I just was really intentional about being really grateful for everything that I was able to see. My friend, it doesn't have that. And so I just spent some time being really, really grateful for what I could see. I was really grateful for the water that I was drinking. There's some parts of the world that doesn't have clean water. And so that is such a gift and something that our bodies need. And I wanted to take time and to appreciate that. And so being grateful that I can walk places, being grateful that my hands work and that my body operates in the way that it's been designed to operate. Another way to do this themed gratitude is to be able to focus on something like love or peace or patience. And just to notice all the examples of when you or somebody else is able to be patient or live out of this value. And so that can be another great way to do that. And the last gratitude practice is writing a gratitude letter. We don't oftentimes write letters anymore in light of emails and Zoom and other technologies. But to be able to take the time to write down and communicate to a loved one why it is that you are grateful to him or her, and also to be able to explain what maybe that act of kindness meant to you. If it is all possible, deliver the letter to them in person and read it to them out loud and leave it with them. It can be a little bit more challenging to do in our current day and age. The research says that when this happened, they describe the changes in the brain as profound and long-lasting for having done this gratitude practice. And so I would encourage you to be able to do that. And knowing that a part of the power of our thoughts is that we're actually changing the structure in our brains. So again, holding this both and, right? We have thoughts and we have feelings, and you may be thinking, this is a lot. In this moment, this sounds really nice, but in the heat of the moment, when these emotions really get going, this is a different story altogether. And you're right in saying that. And so I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about um, the brain science and how to empower yourself to be able to change your thinking by the way that you're able to manage your emotions. Because for some people who are just more cognitive and analytical and more thought based, these practices will feel very natural for you and will be less difficult. If emotions is more of your natural inclination, it's going to feel a little bit more challenging than for those people who are a little bit more cognitive. So the next screen here is just a really generic 1 to 10 scale. And as you can see, I have 1 to 10 and then 3, 5, and 7. When our brains, when we're feeling an emotion, and it could be anxiety or it could be anger, when that reaches that kind of 5 out of 10 mark, that's when that chemical dump happens in our brains. That shuts off that thinking part of our brain because we're running and we're fighting. And so if you're a parent of young kids, you have inevitably experienced a temper tantrum by one of your kids, and their brains are flooded with emotion. And so you don't need me to tell you that when that happens, they need to be de-escalated and they need to calm down before you're able to talk reasonably with them. But we don't actually outgrow that. We hopefully grow and mature in our ability to deal with our emotions, but we just need to be aware as we grow when our brains have that thinking part of our brain has been shut off, so that we can essentially minimize the damage. So you, if for those of you who have teenagers in your life, you'll notice where they are just ramped up and they are not taking in logic. And when you tell someone who's at that 5 or higher to calm down, it doesn't go very well. That just further exasperates people and further escalates people. But it happens to more than just kids, whether it's young kids or teenagers. It can happen to parents and adults as well. We have adult-sized temper tantrums where we are reacting, and we are not living out of our values in those moments. We are just pure and simple reacting out of that animal instinct part of our brains. And so I have an exercise here that, should you choose to do it, can really, really be helpful in increasing your own awareness of yourself, which will enable you to live out of your values more often, but they were also, and help empower you to make healthy choices. But hopefully this will also empower you to observe where other people are at, and then be able to meet them where they are at. Again, regardless of the struggle with it being depression or anxiety. There's the arrow is actually in the middle of the page on purpose. So when I have clients do this activity, I have them draw that 1 to 10 scale in the middle of the page, and on the 2 sides of the page, on one side I have them write down, well, I'll start with on what is on the right side of the screen. On these different scales, these 3, 5, and 7, how do you know when you're feeling an emotion at that level? And how is it different from those other numbers? So at what point do you feel your body getting tight? At what point do you feel that pit in your stomach? At what point do you notice that your chest tightening? At what point do you notice your thoughts racing? Or maybe for you, your thoughts don't race, your thoughts just completely shut off and kind of feel like they're shutting down. And to really kind of plot your experiences on that graph. For people that I do this in therapy with, I automatically fill in 9 and 10 for them if it's anger. So if you are physically abusive, so that means if you're hitting, punching, or throwing things, any and all of that is an automatic 10. Any verbal abuse, excessive name calling, swearing, hurtful put downs, that would automatically be a 9. At that point, encourage people to disengage. You need to be able to calm down first before having a productive conversation. So I automatically fill in 9 and 10. 10 on anxiety would be a panic attack. And then depression oftentimes is how hard is it to do things, and a 10 is oftentimes people struggling to get out of bed in the morning. So how are you, what are you noticing on the inside? What would a video camera not be able to see because it is happening on the inside of you, and to fill that out. And then on the other side, as you can see, what would a video camera pick up on? When are you maybe rolling your eyes? Or you have that look? When does that come out on this 1 to 10 scale? At what point are you raising your voice, or at what point are you yelling? And to be able to make those thoughts and observations. Again, it's really important to, whether you're helping yourself or a loved one, if it's you, we need to take a moment and calm ourselves down. Again, because of this chemical dump that's happened in our body, that can take 18 to 22 minutes. And maybe I should offer an explanation, especially for parents, and actually even spouses. So you may remember me saying earlier that if you are thinking and reliving something, that your brain thinks it's happened multiple times. And so let's say there's a conflict and the person retreats, and then they are like, just think, oh, I can't believe this person said this, or I wish I would have said this. If they're rehashing that conflict, the time, that 18 to 22 minute timer has not started yet. That 18 to 22 minute timer starts when a person is starting to calm down, and then it takes 18 to 22 minutes till then. So this is something that it's very research based, but families and parents can't have too many rules around it. A part of empowering yourself and helping other people is being able to make observations about kind of where you think they're at. Hopefully they might be able to confirm where they're at, but if they are, if you perceive them to be, let's say, at a 7 out of 10, and their brain shuts off at 5 out of 10, they're really escalated. In order to have a product, you just need to know going into that conversation that we need to de-escalate first before we're going to get anywhere, before we can problem solve. We need our brains to be able to problem solve. That thinking part of our brain needs to be online. And so we need to be able to do things to help re-engage that thinking part of our brain before we can actually resolve any of the conflicts. So, and so that's where that's helpful. So if you are the one escalated, it's wise and skillful to be able to remove yourself be able to calm down, get to a healthy place to say, okay, now I'm ready to re-engage. And if you are a loved one and someone is escalated, it is skillful for you to be able to not press them to go further, to be able to give them space so that they can calm down, so that they can come back, and that people can have a hopefully productive conversations where both people have both their mind and their emotions engaged and able to do some problem solving. So the next skill that I want to be able to share, and actually I'm going to pause here before I do that and stop the screen share and just make sure, when I have screen share on, I can't see the Zoom platform, and I wanted to make sure that no one had any questions that they were putting in. So, okay. And sorry, I forgot to mention that, that you are able to ask questions, and if you feel like that would be helpful. But no, if I don't get to your question right away, it's because I have my my screen share up. So so feel free and know that no, that is an option. So the next thing that I will offer up is this different states of mind. Let's see. Maybe? Give me a second. Oh, here we go. I mentioned earlier that some people have a tendency towards their thoughts. Their thoughts are more dominant than their emotions, and other people, their emotions are more dominant than their brain. And so you have these two different minds. And this is, I offer this up as a communication tool and as a tool to understand maybe where you're at or where a loved one is at, so that that can help you actually respond accordingly. This is a really, I use this in part in therapy as a non-judgmental way to communicate. If someone is experiencing a lot of emotion and it appears their brain's been shut off, rather than saying, you know, you're freaking out, calm down, which, as you, I'm sure, already have learned the hard way, that doesn't work. That just gets a bigger reaction. For you to be able to say, looks like you're in your emotion mind right now. Let's see what we can do to get you back into your wise mind so that we can talk and have a helpful conversation. So there's three states of mind. There's the emotion mind, the reasonable mind, and the wise mind. And I'm going to just explain a little bit about each one of those. The first thing, though, that I want to communicate about this is the emotion mind and the reasonable mind. One is not better or worse. They're just very, very different. Oftentimes, we value one higher than the other, or we judge one more harshly than the other. So that is a real reality that we're contending with. And it's important to, again, hold the both and, that both have pros, both have cons, and one's not better or worse. So people who are emotionally minded, again, they're going to experience that emotion, get swept away in it, for better or for worse. Oftentimes when there's a conflict, that can have a negative connotation. But quite frankly, if there's maybe a celebration in your family, maybe a graduation or a birth or a wedding, that will that can thrust people into their emotion mind as well. And that can be just a really positive thing, that they're just fully in the moment, enjoying life, and enjoying the celebration or whatever they are doing in that moment. People who are reasonably minded, again, there's a positive and a negative side. People who are reasonably minded are more likely to actually shut off or disconnect or push away their emotions, and they're going to over rely on their thinking. Again, it's a tendency. It's not bad or good. Good and bad can come from it both. But there's this overlap, where the two circles overlap together in that space, we call that the wise mind. And that is where you will experience the benefits of both your reasonable mind and your emotion mind. And you'll have access to both your thoughts and your feelings. And so you'll be integrated. And that's where it is really helpful to live life from. You will feel emotions, and you may feel those emotions very, very deeply, yet you will be aware of your thoughts, connected to your values, be able to live out of your values, and be able to have a clarity about things. I think that's the biggest thing that it is that people notice when they're in their wise mind, is that they have a clarity. Our emotions kind of shut off our thinking, like we talked about earlier, and so there can be a lot of confusion, but sometimes we can overly analyze and we can get confused too. And so oftentimes that wise-minded place is a place where we feel a sense of peace, even though we might feel very afraid at the same time, or that we have clarity. People feel grounded, and that is just a really wonderful place to be. This next slide, again, just to highlight and reiterate that there's pros and cons to both of these, and that one's not better or worse. And so if you think of, so there's these two arrows, as you can see, and the above the vertical arrows are the positives, and then below the arrows are the negatives of each of the reasonable minds and the wise mind. Let's start with the reasonable mind. People actually have an easier time viewing the positives of that, more so than emotion mind. So this is a place where we do our problem solving. We're logical. We're planning. There's all sorts of really good stuff that we get from being reasonably minded. And there's also really wonderful things that we get from being emotionally minded as well. Things like passion, empathy, being relational, motivating others. Someone used the example, if a house is burning down and you have a loved one in that house, your emotional mind is just going to go into a burning building to save a loved one. You're not going to think about it. You're not going to plan. You're not going to access logic. You're just going to run into that burning building to save the one that you love. And even though emotion mind gets a bad rap, that can be a really good gift. So, and then of course, any good gift comes with the shadow side. And so you'll notice with emotion mind, people tend to get into trouble quite a bit, whether it's because they're raising their voice or doing things impulsively. And oftentimes people are acting out of their hurt and their pain, and they're believing that they're justified in doing so because they feel like they're the victim because they've been hurt. And so, well, I will hold that thought. I'll jump over to the reasonably minded. The negatives is that people who are really reasonably minded can come across as uninterested or uncaring. That they are often misunderstood, and they can come across as very cool, very distant, very aloof. And the farther out you get from your wise mind, the farther out you get, the bigger your urges will be, and there will be a break in relationship. So the break will look different depend on which mind you're in. It's oftentimes, someone will do something impulsive or hurtful in the emotion mind, but in the reasonable mind, that the hurt or the break in relationship will come from someone feeling distant or cool or aloof or being uncaring. And so, again, one's not better or worse. They are just in very different places with very different pros and very different cons. And so, again, the goal is you want to access both of them. We want to have both our thoughts and our feelings. It's a both, and we need them both. I want to talk about this thing called opposite to emotion action. And it's a tool to be able to kind of harness that power of the emotion, because some people, especially if you don't have that tendency to reason mind, you might need some extra help getting out of your emotion mind or de-escalating in order to be able to make healthy decisions and to be able to live out of your values. So when that happens, it's really important to, there's three things, actually four things. So the first is you just observing the emotion, whether it's depression and sadness, whether it's guilt or shame, whether it's anger or it's fear, just to be able to note its presence, step back, and view the emotion as something that is separate from you. As a therapist, I hear all the time, I'm sad. And I totally understand why people are saying that. And sometimes it's helpful for people to realize that they feel sad. It's not like sadness is who they are. It's okay for them to feel sad. And sometimes they need the reminder that the feeling, the emotion is different from who they are as people. And that kind of helps them get unstuck and kind of depersonalize the emotion from themselves. So after you've observed your emotion, it can be really helpful to experience your emotion. Sometimes it's been helpful to think of emotions as a wave that just comes and goes. So to experience the wave coming and going, the anger just washing over you like a wave. It's going to come or it's going to grow. Don't try to block the emotion or to push it away. Don't try to get rid of it. Don't try to keep it or hold on to it or amplify it. Allow it to come and allow it to go, just like you don't control a wave in the ocean. And again, remember, you are not your emotion. So some people believe that they just need to act on the emotion, and that is not true. And sometimes it can be really, really helpful to be able to remember times when you felt different. So if you're feeling really depressed, or if you know a loved one who is feeling very, very depressed, to be able to say, uh, tell me about a time when you did feel happy. Or tell me a time when you felt peaceful. Tell me a time when you felt content. And then that just reminds us that this feeling is going to come and go. This emotion feels like it's just kind of taken over, but there are other emotions, and I felt them before, and I will feel them again. And it can be really helpful to practice taking a non-judgmental stance of our emotions. We learn that we just judge ourselves, or we judge other people. And so it's important to not just observe the emotion without judging it, being able to accept it just for what it is, and then watching it come and watching it go. And as we're able to do that, another really important skill is called opposite, or changing your emotions by acting opposite to that emotion. So let's take fear, for example. If your struggle or a loved one's struggle is fear, to actually approach what you're afraid of and do it over and over and over again, assuming that the fear is not a founded fear. To approach those places. So maybe you're afraid of, you have social anxiety and you're afraid to be around people. In small ways to approach people and activities and tasks that you are afraid of, and not to give into the urge to be able to withdraw or to isolate. It's actually healthy in this case to be able to approach what you are afraid of, and to be able to do that in a way that increases your sense of control and mastery. And when you feel overwhelmed, to be able to break smaller tasks down in or bigger tasks into smaller tasks, and then just start. And so just because you have an emotion, to be really intentional about not acting on it. And in fact, it's really helpful then to just actually do the opposite of what that emotion is telling you to do. And that same thing can be said of anxiety or sadness and depression as well. That oftentimes when people are noticing sadness and depression, there's a lack of motivation, a lack of desire. The urge is just to stay in bed, or to stay home, or to stay on the couch. And so the opposite to emotion action is to actually get engaged, to do something, to get active, to approach, and to not avoid. And to do things that help you feel competent and self-confident, and maybe even building mastery over something, whether it's a skill set, or maybe a hobby, but to be able just to approach, and to not avoid. And you can do the same thing with anger. Oftentimes when we're angry, the tendency is to attack, to blame, or to say and do something that's hurtful. But instead, the opposite to emotion action would be to maybe gently withdraw until you're calm, or to be able to say something nice or kind, or to imagine something, or to imagine empathy for that other person, rather than shaming or blaming them. The thing that I want to say in closing with some of these skills, especially the opposite to emotion action, um, and even the gratitude, and the wise mind, um, I would encourage you to focus on doing them yourself first. Um, these skills, especially if you are a spouse or a parent, are easier caught than taught. It generally doesn't go well, and people don't perceive it to be very helpful. When you're telling them to do something, then you are willing to do yourself. And if oftentimes both people need to change, and so it can be we're working on this together. Um, but the power to teach other people through our own behavior is really, really profound. And modeling these skills is super helpful and super important, especially from a parenting perspective. Um, and Sometimes it's really challenging, especially for those of you who are have or are working with younger kids, and teens. It's really helpful for them to not only have you explain these skills and tools to them, but to also show them what it's like for you to live out of these skills and tools, and to be able to do that, really, really intentionally and really purposefully. You modeling this to them is oftentimes more meaningful, and at a minimum needs to happen in combination with you sharing and um, telling them kind of what to do, and what to do that differently.